Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
Hey everybody, hello, welcome to the Go Show, and I am one of the hosts, Seika Groves, and I am here today to sit and listen to everybody else talk for a change.
Yep, that's right.
And I am an archaeologist, or an archaeologist, if I'm using my correct English grammar. An archaeologist, I'm also which is an afterlife switchboard operator, aka a psychic medium. And I've got my two other co-hosts here today, and Rachel's actually going to be the one running the show today because this is her topic. So if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
That's right. I'm Rachel Bender. I'm a psychic medium and also a paranormal investigator right here in northern New York, America.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ian. I am a paranormal investigator, a paranormal researcher, and I am the third co-host of The Ghost Show.
So, Rachel, what are we talking about today? Because you kind of threw this out here, and I'm not familiar with this location, believe it or not. Can you believe it? There's actually something I'm not familiar with.
No, I can't believe it because you're quite the academic amongst us, aren't you, Seeker? And
yeah, but
you typically are educating me when it comes to these things. This time I'm going to be taking the seat, and I really have been fascinated with this particular island. They've covered it on Ghost Adventures. I believe it's there's been several YouTube channels where people have gone onto this particular island, and that's the island of Poveglia, and it's near Venice. It's in Italy, and if you look at it from above, it's almost like a slice of pizza. It's like a triangle shape, so it is a bit of an unusual shape, and it's broken up, and it does have so much history attached to it, which is what I found incredibly fascinating. And it's very old, and even today, people are still, intrigued by the island, and its history. And its first historical record was in 421. And it was, populated there by residents. And from there, it's been used as a quarantine station from those suffering from the plague. And that's what it's primarily been used as. So they would house people in boats onto this island, the Poveglia Island, and, basically used it as a quarantine station. For those suffering from the disease. And eventually from there, it went on to become a mental hospital as well. So the hospital, and they built a hospital in 1776, I believe, around then. That was awful, it went from a place where they sent people to die of serious diseases to a place where it's supposed to be therapeutic and they're supposed to be helping people. But unfortunately, this mental institution was a place of horror. Obviously, back then, mental health is not what it is today. It was in its infancy. There was a doctor there who was said to be on the island, who was trying to help patients. They performed regular lobotomies. Patients were trained up. There was, obviously a lot of torment on the island. There wasn't much therapy. People, once they got on the island, there were very few survivors. No, very rarely got off the island. So they basically died on the island. And actually, it's said that at least half of the island is covered in human bones, human ash. And during its days there as a mental hospital, and when they were quarantining there, they just built pyres of fires and burnt everybody's bodies on the fire. And because of that, the majority of the island is covered in bones and ash, which is pretty horrific in itself. But that's part of the reason that it has this paranormal background as well. Speaking about this doctor, it's said because he was said to have seen the ghosts of the medieval, the ones that were quarantined. This doctor went insane himself, and he was claiming that he saw ghosts, and he couldn't get the ghosts out of his mind. And he climbed up to the bell tower, and there's a bell tower that you'll see that's still there today, I believe. But they removed the bell itself, and people around locally can still hear the bell chiming, even though there's no bell, which is very interesting. But apparently the doctor went insane himself and climbed up the bell tower and jumped off it and killed himself. So there again, there's another, mysterious death attached to the island. So yeah, it's basically so that happened too with the island. And I find it very fascinating. I know at this moment in time today, it still exists. The building's still there. The old bell tower is still there, but I believe they changed it and converted it into a lighthouse now. Somebody very recently bought the island in 2014. But yet it's just stayed there. It's just like remained. It was bought to convert into a resort. Apparently they were going to actually make it into a resort, but nothing's been said from the Italian government yet. They haven't actually made any groundbreaking ceremonies. Nothing's changed. It just seems like it's been bought out and it sits there. So I guess, it can only be visited by boats. The Italian government won't allow anybody to actually set foot on the island. They won't give permission for that. And any locals will not go near the island itself. They will stay away from it. Because of its reputation, because they claim to hear voices, and they hear the ghost souls screaming into the night. They hear the bell ringing at the bell tower, and when there's no bell, they had that removed. There's just things that they can't explain there going on. And I think, having seen, I'm so curious about this island. I'd love to go and visit it in person. It's something that I think I find very fascinating, but it definitely gives me the creeps, the heebie-jeebies, it's a great place. Do you have any questions?
I have a couple of questions, actually.
Sure, go right ahead.
So based on the location of this island, right? It's off. Is it part of the Venetian Islands? Is that where it is?
It's in the South Lagoon off of Venice.
Okay, so it is part of the Venetian Islands then. So the people that were going there in the period during the plague, I'm taking, were coming from places like Venice directly, or were they coming from outside of Venice?
Or coming into Venice. They may have been in Venice. They may have been coming in as well, and were quarantined when it was discovered that they were carrying the plague.
Okay.
That's right.
So
they were abandoned there. They were left without any care.
So this is my kind of place. And I say that
I knew it would be.
As an archaeologist, I find these sites fascinating because of the history that's attached to them, but also too because of the ability to understand people at different periods in time by looking at what they did or did not do with, people who fell ill or people who were perhaps schizophrenic or mentally ill. And we have quite a few of these sites dotted, across, let's say, Europe. We have some in North America, but of course, the ones in North America are much newer. They're within the last only few hundred years. But we do have these ones going back. So my thought here is, and I don't know if this is the case at the time when Poveglia, is it Poveglia? Poveglia had the asylum on it. Is that something that was able to be visited by the public, or was it private? Because there used to be this sort of weird thing, and you may know, Rachel and Ian, you may know about this, but in places like Paris and London at the time, the 1700s, early 1800s, these places were attractions for the general public. And there was literally a saying in French. I don't know the French saying, I just know the English translation, but it was along the lines of pay a penny to poke a patient. So you would actually line up at the gate on a certain day. You were allowed into the institutions. They would give you a stick and you would pay your, penny, whatever it might be. And you were able to go into the asylum, and you were actually able to abuse the people within the asylum as entertainment. So because they were keeping people in cages in hallways, and they were, doing things like that, especially people with epilepsy, and that they would confine them to these very small cages where they could only lay down, and they were placed in these cages. They had no clothing. They were sort of left to their own devices.
Oh, awful.
And things. But the sort of upper middle class would be able to pay to come through these places and literally stick people with, like, give them a poke with a stick to see what kind of reaction you would get. And I'm curious if Poveglia also, being where it was and off the coast of Venice, they're part of the Venetian island chain. During this time period, it may also been susceptible to this same form of entertainment. I mean, it's something that we think is very, odd and strange today, of course, that we don't like to treat people with, these types of problems. And I don't even want to say problems. They're just different from us, right? They have a different capacity. We wouldn't think of doing that, but it really was a thing in this time period. So I'm curious, outside of the paranormal side of things, is that something that Poveglia may have also allowed, which in turn may have made some of the people from the asylum even a little more angry and unhappy, and perhaps willing to remain in spirit instead of moving wherever one goes or believes one goes when they pass.
In my opinion, I highly doubt it, because it was a plague quarantine facility back then. Originally. And even today, the citizens of Venice seem to have this creepy feeling about Poveglia.
Yes.
That they feel the island is cursed, and you can't even get any of the Venetian citizens to even talk about it.
Right.
You even mention Poveglia, and they'll just, scatter away from you. They'll ignore you. As Rachel says, it's no one is allowed to visit the island today. It's off limits. Except,
was it purchased privately? Then how does the government have any kind of say over that?
Okay, to correct what, or maybe not correct, but to add what Rachel was saying, yes, the island was put up for sale.
Okay.
Was purchased by a businessman who was going to turn the ruins of all the buildings into a hotel resort. That fell through. Nothing happened.
Okay.
Nothing happened. None of those buildings have ever even been slightly restored. They're still just and dilapidated.
Okay.
So I don't know what the reason was, but yes, this guy bought the island. Nothing happened, and the Venetian government took the island back from him.
Oh, I see. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Perhaps
So the island is still abandoned. The buildings are just broken and falling apart.
just
And
did
as I
Quite
say,
tragic.
local
The
citizens
hospital's still there, the
seem to
clinic's
be
still there, the church
absolutely
is still there.
terrified of this island. They think it's cursed. They won't go near it.
right. Which we should, bring up when we do our show on superstition, because again,
That's a
these kinds of things that prevail depending on your belief systems and what happens in your lifetime. But interesting enough, so Rachel, you found this just sort of through research, and you're interested in the island.
yes.
I'm curious as to what are some of the actual stories, like the ghost stories that are attached to the island. I mean, I can see, the guy climbing up, jumping off, etc. We might have some kind of, spirit perhaps, or at least some residual energy attached to that. But what in terms of this island makes it so different from other places that were also places of burial for the bubonic plague? I mean, London, England had massive burials. What I'm curious about is the bubonic plague people that they sent there. Were there any kind of facilities there at that time, or were they just kind of put there and left to their own devices? They just died on the island.
Yeah.
Then what happened? Because
That's right.
That is to the best of my knowledge.
Mhm.
That's the best of my knowledge. Yes, that's what happened. They were quarantined, left to themselves. When they died, their bodies were burned,
Okay.
and that whole second part of the island, because the island is split into two. It's
Okay.
actually two separate little islands separated by a little channel that goes through. The second island is basically composed of human ash from when all these bodies from the plague were burned.
Right. And they
And
deposited them on.
that's what basically created the second part of the island. It's completely made up of human ash.
They were just dumping the ash after the pyres. They were taking the ash and moving it and dumping it into water, and it created its own island, or was there an island?
Yeah, that's basically what my understanding is. Yeah.
I don't know how
That's
that
how
works.
the second part of the island came. But
Yeah.
in addition to that, you want to talk about, okay, well, why is it haunted? I agree with Rachel. It's this doctor that went insane when the island became a mental facility.
Right.
And this
Yeah.
crazy doctor
He claimed it
filmed
was the
himself
ghosts.
from the bell tower.
Mhm.
And it's claimed that his ghost is the dominant one on the island.
If they say hypothetically that gentleman who purchased the island did
Right.
turn it into a leisure resort, a hotel, for example, would you go and stay there?
Yeah.
Would you, Ian?
I would,
you do
yeah,
a
sure.
paranormal investigation on the actual hotel? Or
Oh, you bet.
Me too. I mean,
because I would.
yeah.
I'm not sure I'd want to stay there overnight, but yeah, I would go with my ghost equipment. My
I'd love
Would
to
you-
go there now, as it's abandoned. Never
Oh,
mind
yeah.
being a resort. I'd love to go right now and do it, but
me
obviously,
too.
no one is allowed to go there, so that ends that.
Clearly some people are allowed to go there. Like if you're doing a television show, you can get some kind of permit or permission to go over to the island and make sure that it's
Right, Ghost Adventures did.
But at the same time, I just find these these locations interesting because they are so. I don't want to say they're isolated, because this is not an isolated island. It is, part of essentially the greater Venice area, at least from what I'm reading here. But it's almost like it's got its own built-in, dark tourism niche, that if somebody was to turn it into a resort, it would make sense to turn it into a dark tourism resort as opposed to a spa. And because to me that just seems almost counterproductive. Could you imagine like all these unsuspecting people going to the lovely island of Poveglia and they don't really know the history of the island, and they go there, and then all this stuff starts happening. I mean,
Well, as I say, all the locals think the island is cursed.
right.
So
Oh
even if
yeah,
it was turned into a resort, you're not getting any of those local people to go there whatsoever.
And you're not going to get them to
oh
work
yeah.
clearly either, because
Yeah, there would be no workers, correct.
locally is
Where
gonna-
would you get the hotel staff from? It wouldn't
Yeah.
be the locals,
Mhm.
that's for sure. Yeah.
and then you've got to
Yeah.
find people who clearly speak
Can't get guides.
several. Well, you could. I mean, you could bring people in that speak multiple languages. That's the beauty of Europe. People speak more than one language, unlike here in North America, where we're limited to, mostly one language. We're lucky if we know any others, but most Europeans know at least 2, 3, 4, some know 5 or 6 languages. And so I think getting staff wouldn't be a problem if you're bringing outside staff in. But it's interesting too, because you would have this real conundrum of, having provisions delivered to the island,
Mhm.
which locals want to, bring a boat over full of provisions, full of food,
No,
produce.
no, they won't go near it. The locals won't go near it. Yeah.
This businessman probably didn't really do a whole lot of research on this island beforehand. I mean, if you think about it, if you were going to do something like this and spend, I don't know what the island cost, but if you were going to spend that kind of money, would you not at least do some research to find out that you're really going to kind of be up the creek without any kind of local support whatsoever on a venture like this? I mean, the haunted aspect aside, the economic aspect of this is a disaster. So
Yeah.
I
think when it comes to developers and businessmen, they don't always have that. They don't take into consideration, hauntings or the history of a building. Some are quite happy to just tear down,
I wonder
something. And
here's something to talk about, or something to think about. So the island was used until the late 1960s, right?
yeah,
But we have a generation of people that essentially are my age, Ian's age, and we're a little bit older. Now, what happens when that generation ages out of the workforce or ages out of I don't imagine that modern young people are really too concerned about the Poveglia, sort of prehistory or the superstition surrounded by it. I mean, I have young adults and they don't care about that stuff. You know what I mean? It's not like the older people that have grown up with these sort of myths or stories or superstitions. A lot of younger people, they hear it from their grandparents, or they might hear it from their parents, but do they really heed it? Right. So I kind of wonder if down the road, another, maybe 10 years, that this business guy's sitting on the
from an Italian family, and trust me, they're superstitious. They believe if they saw a black cat, they believe in a generational curse. Like there's things that they.
But I don't think the young people necessarily do. I mean, I grew up around a lot of Italians. I grew up in a predominantly Italian neighborhood. And while the nonna and, mom, dad might, the young kids never believed in any of that stuff. And those were young kids when I was a kid. And they were like, we don't believe in that stuff. So I think that what happens is, as you age out, you do end up losing some of these superstitions, some of these beliefs, some of these things that go along with these places. It doesn't remain. And we do see this over and over again. I mean, case in point, places like Stonehenge that, so many hundreds of years ago, people might have been a little bit more concerned about, taking rocks from there and doing things, but they certainly weren't concerned in the Victorian era already. They were stealing the monolithic stones and using them for fences and doing, building houses with them and doing all sorts of things. So, I mean, there's these ideas, we kind of think, oh, well, all of them will be like that. But I don't think so. I think the younger generations, as they move forward, they tend to be less, believing or less superstitious. They're moving ahead in a modern world where this stuff is pretty old school to them. Like, what grandma and grandpa are saying, they're not really buying into anymore. I I mean, I see it even with my own kids, but I see it with many kids. Like if you talk to younger generation now, they don't believe in things that we believed in when we were kids. So I think that maybe this business guy bought this property with the idea of sitting on it for 20 years and then perhaps, moving along and doing something with it. I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking that 20 years from now, some of these people that believe in the curse or the island being cursed, etc., may not feel that way. When you have new generations of people who kind of think that's just old and outdated. And, I mean, it's happening everywhere.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.